Hello, my name is Nick Newton, and I'm the Chief of Police for the Oakdale Police Department. We are creating this video in collaboration with the Minnesota Department of Corrections to inform our community about a Level 3 predatory offender moving into our city. We're trying something new, with using this video platform as a way to reach as many members of our community as possible. We are reporting this information to you as we want to protect our community by disclosing information about this offender moving into our city. We recognize that when a Level 3 offender moves into our community, it can create feelings of fear and angst. Please know, the safety of our community is of the highest priority. While we embrace and seek to protect the constitutional rights of all, make no doubt about it that your police officers are well aware of this individual moving into our city, and we will continue proactively policing to make our community as safe as possible. We have brought in a subject matter expert to assist with this notification. Brad VanderVegt from the Department of Corrections will provide some useful information about predatory offenders and share information pertaining to this individual moving to our city. Brad is considered an authority on predatory offenders, and he helps cities and counties throughout the state of Minnesota with community notifications. Before I turn this over, take note, there will be contact information for the Department of Corrections and the Oakdale Police Department following this presentation. Should you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to the Department of Corrections to start the presentation.
Hello, and thank you for taking the time today to review this important information. I'm Brad VanderVegt, and I'm with the Minnesota Department of Corrections in the Risk Assessment and Community Notification Unit. And today, my presentation is going to come in three distinct parts. I'm going to begin and talk about the foundations of the broader state risk management system and how it applies to this unique population of individuals. And then I'm going to use that information as I transition into the specifics about the individual you're here to learn about today. And then I will wrap up with some resources as you work to apply this new knowledge into your existing community and family safety planning efforts. And so for meetings like this, where I really like to begin is with what we as communities already know and understand. And that is that those individuals that engage in this type of harm, sexual harm, they exist. And we understand that we've taken numbers of efforts and to mitigate and minimize those incidences from occurring. But the question that really comes up is, what is it that we are doing as various agencies and entities to address those who we've identified and who have come through that criminal justice system? And so one of the first components that came online in that broader state risk management system is the registry, originally known as the Sex Offender Registry. And it was really born out of the advocacy and work of the Wetterling family onto other agencies supporting victims and families of victims, where they went around following the abduction of Jacob and asked law enforcement, what more can we do to provide you with the tools you need to manage this unique population? And at the time, what law enforcement really said resoundingly was, we need a system that brings all of our collective data together. Because prior to the registry, information collected and retained by local law enforcement on persons of interest were housed in their own unique file systems. And so the registry brought them all together in this one hub, so they could easily access critical information at moments when it was most needed and important. And so the registry has grown and changed over the years as needs have modified as well. And is a couple things to keep in mind with the registry is that it is run and maintained by the state's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, or BCA. And the information collected on it is designated by the legislature as private data, meaning it can only be accessed by law enforcement or corrections for their very specific purposes of managing this population. Now, the registry collects and retains a number of key data components from those subject to it, from their primary address onto any secondary addresses where they are known to frequent. So think of places like a significant other's home or family member's home that they may visit with some regularity or frequency. That too must be made known on the registry. They also must make known any employers that they have or are working for. And if they operate a motor vehicle for that employer, that information must also be made known to the registry. In addition to that, any schools that they may attend must be made known to law enforcement, and any vehicles that they themselves either use, own, or possess must be made known to law enforcement. Some additional information that the registry collects and retains are things like scars, marks, and tattoos, or any rental properties such as storage units and things of that nature. And so you can see the robustness of the registry so that at a time of need, law enforcement can query it at any given moment and retain important information about potential persons of interest so that they can continue their policing efforts. Now, as I mentioned, the registry has grown and changed and is no longer only focused on those who engage in sex-specific crimes. And this is why the name changed. Some of you may recall it was the Sex Offender Registry, and at one point we switched it to the Predatory Offender Registry. And this is because the legislature saw the benefit of this as a policing tool for law enforcement and grew it to incorporate additional offenses that were not sex specific. And as you can see here, those offenses are kidnapping and false imprisonment. So as I go forward today, just know that an easy way to kind of keep it straight in your mind is that all individuals that engage in sexual harm are predatory offenders, while not every predatory offender is a sex offender. Now, in order to help kind of put some perspective on this conversation, I like to take a moment to show you a snapshot of the registry and its information. And for meetings like this, I'm able to kind of take what I call a 30,000 foot kind of flyover view, peek out of the window. And so as you're looking at this information, I want to place in your mind the analogy of a funnel. And I want you to think at the largest end of that funnel are those who we've identified as engaging in sexual harm. That's all of them. And what we know from all of our data and information, and we have a lot of data, is that of those we've identified, they represent only a portion of those engaging in this type of harm. Over 2/3 of those who are victimized by sexual harm do not report to law enforcement, and our funnel begins to narrow already. Of those who do report to law enforcement, we know that only a portion of that group will go on to have the allegations charged, and the funnel narrows yet again. And of those charged, we know that only a portion of that group will go on to receive convictions, and we narrow again. And of those convicted, only a portion of that group may go on to enter prison. And I'll explain here coming up why that's an important indicator or distinction. But by the time we get to these numbers here before you, know that we are well down that funnel already. To the point where of all of our registered individuals in Minnesota, as of the first of this year, 2023, we had approximately 18,288. That's all of them, from risk levels that aren't assigned to levels 1, 2, and 3. And of that 18,288, as of the 13th, the date of this recording, you can see the breakdown of the numbers in and around communities around Oakdale. Know that these numbers fluctuate and change with quite a great deal of frequency. But hopefully this helps to kind of give you a snapshot. So of that 18,288, you can see, for example, 310 of those registrants report primary residency within Washington County. That smaller number to the right indicates those subject to broad public notification. So of that 310, only 3 are subject to this type of information and notification. As we zoom in on the city of Oakdale, that 310, 48 of those individuals report primary residence here within the city of Oakdale, and of which at this moment of this recording, none of those 48 are subject to broad public notification. And you can see neighboring communities throughout your area and region. And the number on the left are those subject to the registration. And that could be no level assigned, 1, 2, or 3. And if there are 3 or subject to broad public notification, that's the number on the right. And so the bottom line, or the takeaway here, is that from those that we get to talk about, they are already a very small percentage of the group we've identified. And so broad awareness is just so very critical, because even right now in the city of Oakdale, as there are no current level 3s residing here, I wouldn't want your community to be any less aware of these issues and to have these important conversations with those in your lives. Another component of that broader risk management system came online a little further down from the registry. So the registry was in the early 90s, and the Community Notification Act came online, as you can see here, in 1997. And the Notification Act is built and predicated upon the knowledge and understanding from our research and data that a well-informed community is in fact a safer community. And we in the Department of Corrections commend and thank the Oakdale Police Department and the City of Oakdale for all of its efforts to ensure that the best information is proliferated out as well as they absolutely can. And because the Notification Act is the reason we're here today and having this important conversation, I want to get into some of the details as to just how it's situated and set up to function and work. So the Community Notification Act, as I mentioned earlier in my numbers slide, only applies to certain individuals. In order for community notification to apply, the registrant must be an adult who has entered prison, not jail, but prison. If they've crossed the threshold of a prison, they are then subject to a risk level assessment and assignment. So that can be any prison within the United States to include U.S. territories, any military prisons, federal prisons, and such. And so the group of no level assigned individuals are those adult registrants who have received stayed or probationary sentences and not entered prison as a result of their conviction. And it also does not apply to juvenile registrants. So for those that do go on to cross that threshold and enter into a prison system or facility, the next question often is, who does what? And so the breakdown is really split up between the Department of Corrections and law enforcement. So once an individual crosses that threshold, the Department of Corrections is tasked to assess and assign risk. And we do that through our End of Confinement Review Committee, or the ECRC. This committee will convene 90 days prior to a registrant's release back into the state or earlier, and will pull together an array of information and data. We will do a full data sweep through our team, through our unit, and collect any documentation from risk level assessments done previously to psychosexual assessments or evaluations, psychoneurologicals, anything we can get our hands on, criminal complaints, and so on. And our assessors will then compile all of that data, review it, and put together an interview where they will sit down with that registrant and they will go over all of the specifics. Then they will take all of that collected information and run it through our state's risk management and assessment tool known as the MinSOST, or the Minnesota Sex Offender Screening Tool. Now, it's important to understand this tool because it is the way we assess and assign risk. So the MinSOST is born out of a series of significant research studies that were conducted here by the Department of Corrections. This research began in the early 90s as these laws were starting to come online, and the first phase of it concluded in the early 2000s, so over a decade of research where we tracked over 3,166 known adult male sex offenders back into Minnesota communities over that period of time. And our assessors marked their successes and they marked their failures. And their failures became those known predictive factors. And so when I speak to you today about a level 1 designee, know that what I'm saying is that this individual scores at a level to that peer group from the study of lower risk to reoffend. A level 2 scores at that moderate level of those known to reoffend. And a level 3 scores at that higher level of those known predictive risk factors. A couple things to keep in mind as you contemplate risk assessment tools and how we utilize them. While they are very good at helping agencies like law enforcement and corrections focus their resources most effectively to mitigate those identified risk factors and enhance those known protective factors, one thing they cannot do is predict the future. Another thing to keep in mind about risk assessment and risk assignment is that risk is dynamic. It is fluctuating and changing all the time. And what I mean by that is a level 1 designee today, if they are not abiding by those known protective factors and adhering to those expectations of the criminal justice system, law enforcement, and the community, may find that their risk is reassessed and their level goes up. Just as a level 3 designee today, if they are engaged in positive, pro-social, mitigating behavior and conduct for a significant period of time, may find that their risk is reassessed and it goes down. So just keep that in mind as we go forward today. So once a risk level is assessed and assigned, our handoff then goes to our partners in law enforcement, and they will provide notification within the scope of that designated level. So for a level 1 designee, law enforcement will notify other law enforcement agencies. They will notify victims of or witnesses to the offense if they've requested that level of enhanced notification. And they will also notify immediate adult household members residing in the home with that individual registrant. And that is the scope of a level 1 notification. A level 2 notification builds on those individuals and entities we just discussed for level 1 and incorporates additional individuals or entities that law enforcement designates as being at particular risk based on that registrant's known pattern of conduct and behavior. So it's commonly believed that with a level 2 registrant, law enforcement is going to provide notification to schools, daycares, or places where children or vulnerable individuals are known to congregate. And that very well may be true, but it is not always the case. So take, for example, a scenario where law enforcement receives information from the risk assessment unit and that dossier comes to them and they review it and determine that this level 2 registrant that's about to enter their community focuses their conduct and behavior against adult females at social gatherings. Think bars or concert venues or something like that. In that scenario, law enforcement may very well focus their notification on the proprietors of those venues, as say opposed to the local daycare that serves children from infancy to school age. Now on the flip side, let's say law enforcement is made aware of a level 2 entering their community and they know that this individual focuses their conduct and behavior against unaccompanied minor children, teens, in transition from school to after-school programs or home. And law enforcement knows that in their community there is a teen hotspot, a hangout spot where these kids come together and socialize in these down times. Now in this scenario, law enforcement very well may focus their notification efforts on the proprietor of that teen hangout spot. And so that is the nuance of a level 2 notification. And then with a level 3 notification, it is broad public information. And that comes in a variety of formats and is really connected to how law enforcement communicates best with its community. And at the end of the day, what you can know across the state is that while there's nuance between agencies, the one thing that will always occur is that the Department of Corrections website, the public registrant search tool, will be updated. And so there's where you can find those subject to community notification. And anything beyond that is value added. Now I want to shift gears and talk with you a little bit more about that research tool, the MinSauce, because it is where we've gained so much of our insight and knowledge on this important topic, so that you can use that information as you incorporate this into your family and community safety planning. So where I'd like to start with the information and data is at the narrowest end of that funnel. Those who have crossed the threshold of prison and are re-entering our communities. Now, the number of people that come into our institutions year after year does fluctuate and change. But what we find remains fairly static is the breakdown of risk levels assigned. And as you can see here, the majority of levels assigned are those of levels 1 and 2. About 15%, again, on average, are designated level 3. And so again, it's just a reference back to that broad awareness is just so very critical. We do not want to leave you here today focusing on just one individual. If you were to have pulled up our public registrant search, that often gets confused as the registry, but just know that it is our search tool and it is for those subject to broad notification. It's not the full 18,000. If you'd have pulled that up this morning, as I did on October 13th, and said, show them all to me, you would have seen 450 individuals who were subject to that notification. And again, thinking back to that 18,000 sum, we know that this is just a very small portion. Of that 450, 13 are out of compliance and need to be brought back into compliance. So you may wonder to yourself, is this valuable? Does this help? And the reality, from what we know and what we've learned, is that this very much does, because the conduct and behavior that applies to these individuals applies across the board. And so you can use this information to modify and augment and create and build those safety planning tools that are going to help more broadly, which is really the ultimate goal. And then when you think about those who are out of compliance and wonder perhaps what value does this have to know, because we know one of our other key components of that broader state risk management system is the community, because the community is vigilant. And if you see this individual or anybody engaging in conduct or behavior that you know to be predictive or risky, we want you to reach out and connect. Other information I want to share with you from the research studies. This actually is from a national study done by the Bureau of Justice and really aligns with our information. But I like to give you a little bit of diversity in the slides that I'm showing you today. But what we found is between the relationships of those that engage in this type of harm and the people they hurt is an important component of from what you can see. The majority of those engaging in sexual harm know the people they're hurting. They have a relationship of trust that they have built, whether through family connections or acquaintanceships. As you can see here, 7% fall into that stranger category. Now, this is obviously the group that gives us as communities the most pause, as it should, because we know that we have a lot of direct influence and impact over those in our family. We can set and maintain boundaries wherever we may need them. And we can even do so with those acquaintances. We can determine as trusted adults in our children and vulnerable individuals' lives who gets to have that all-important relationship of trust. And we have a number of tools that assist you as trusted adults in vetting those folks. But that stranger group is the group we do not have direct impact or control over. So it's important to note some of the limitations to research like this. The assessors of these relationships had to create a cutoff of what constitutes a knowing. And they determined that that cutoff is going to be 24 hours. If they could not show through the data and information they had available that a relationship, a knowing, existed of 24 hours or greater, that person or that situation would fall into the stranger category. So inevitably, with a cutoff like that, you would end up with situations like this, where, say, a 19-year-old is attending a house party, and there are a number of teenagers in and around this party. And unbeknownst to them, or perhaps known to them, they encounter a 15-year-old that's in attendance as well. And the night's going the way it's going, and they hit it off. And they leave the watchful group to an isolated location within the home or outside of the home, and the night takes an awful turn. Now, this situation would fall into that stranger category. But what we tend to think of more when we as community members and parents think about strangers, we tend to think of that person lurking just outside of our awareness and our consciousness who has ill intent. And that group tends to fall into a much smaller percentage of about 3%. Now that is cold comfort, I'm very well aware. But as you've heard me say, the last thing I want is for you to be focusing all of your attention on that 3% group and not seeing the potential risk within the much more likely group of those that have built or established those relationships of trust. The last bit of data that I want to share with you before I get into the specifics about the man you're here to learn about, I also think is probably the most potent. And that is the age breakdowns of those harmed by this conduct and behavior. And as you can see here, it is broken into thirds. But as you are looking closer at this information, you will start to see very quickly that 2/3 are children. And you're going to start to look at those numbers even more closely, and you're going to see that that narrowest age range up here, those teenagers, are 33% of those harmed. That is significant. And it is worth unpacking what is going on here. What do we know? Well, what we know is with those kids in those early years who are under that watchful, caring observation of their trusted adult support networks, are very much going to be influenced by their ability to vet the people coming into their lives. And so this is where we utilize a lot of our tools to help you in those decisions of who gets to have that relationship of trust. But what we find is when we get into those teenage years is that our kids start to formulate relationships outside of that watchful oversight. And so what we've found is that the old method of the talk, where we used to pull our kids aside at that critical age and maybe pull the veil back just enough to show them that the world is not as safe as it had been made to be for them when they were younger, we found that that method really kind of resulted in one of two very distinct reactions from our kids. It was either just full-on rejection, "Dad, you're overreacting. My friends are fine." Or it was on the other side of the spectrum of, "This is so frightening," and they start to withdraw from the very things they've grown to love in their lives. Neither reaction is what we seek. And so what we have learned through our work in collaboration with various victim services agencies throughout the state and beyond is that we really want to formulate and have a lot of little talks, age appropriate in their design, that grow with our children from those early ages all the way into those formative teenage years, where they have a toolbox that's been built increasingly stronger so that when they get to those ages where they're formulating those relationships outside of their parental oversight, they have a lot of skills available to them. We also want to keep them age appropriate in that we know that we do not want to frighten our children, because scared kids are not safe kids. But we also need our kids to understand that nice people do not equal safe people. Kids have a pretty easy time identifying people that make them uncomfortable or feel unsafe. But where kids tend to struggle, in the research that we've seen and has been conducted, is in saying no to someone they like. And this is where things can get a whole lot more complex and difficult. And so I will give you some additional resources here when we transition into the resource side of this presentation, as you're looking to formulate and add to those conversations in your family safety planning. But now I'd like to transition and speak to you specifically about the man you're here to learn about. Please use the information I've shared with you thus far as an overlay and see where things may align and where they may diverge. Oh, really quickly, before I do that, I apologize. I have mentioned a number of times about providing resources on the state level for those adult support persons that are vetting people coming into kids' lives, whether it's a volunteer coach or a youth minister or a tutor. These are those tools. You may be familiar with them, but if you're not, I want to just share those with you. Two of the good tools in the state. One is through the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, where they do maintain that registry, but they also maintain a public criminal history search tool for criminal histories in Minnesota. All you need is an individual's first name, last name, and date of birth, and you can see their criminal history. And so that's a good starting point. It's free, and you don't need any special memberships or anything like that to access it. Also, the Department of Corrections website. We have our research and data on all of those slides I showed you with all the information in its pure form for you to review and scrutinize and formulate and draw your own conclusions on. We also have the locator tool for all individuals subject to Department of Corrections supervision and oversight, and then that public registrant search tool. And if you ever need help getting to anything within the DOC site, please do contact me and I will make sure you can get there. Now I'd like to transition into the man we're here to learn about today. This is Jeremy Breezee. First, I'd like to speak to photographs. Photographs are updated on average of annually, or if the individual changes or modifies their appearance in a significant way. If you were to see Mr. Breezee in the community and note that he no longer looks like these photos, certainly let either law enforcement or corrections know, and they will attain updated photos and get them onto the registry, where I will then attain them and get them onto the public registrant search site, so that you will always have an accurate depiction of what this man looks like for as long as he is subject to broad public notification. This is Mr. Breeze's vitals. He's currently 42 years of age and will be residing in the 6100 block of 9th Street North here in Oakdale. Now, I'm going to take a moment and address a question that will often come up in meetings like this. And that question is Brad, will you tell us where he lives? It would give us a great deal of comfort if we know where his head hits the pillow at night. And what I'll remind you is that the specific information of where he resides is very much known and accessible to law enforcement and corrections. But as you remember, that specific information is private data. But we find that we can accomplish a lot with a proximal address, because there's very little doubt in a community as close-knit as Oakdale that for those in this region or this area, they will become aware of Mr. Breezee as he comes and goes in his day-to-day activities. And that information will be shared amongst the neighbors in the community, and that's just fine. But what we do not want as state agencies is for that information to proliferate more broadly, to the point where somebody from well outside of the Oakdale community may come in to exact some vigilante revenge scenario that does nothing to restore a victim and does nothing to mitigate risk or future harm, and only works to disrupt the very thing you've worked so hard to build and grow here in your community. And so this is why we use the proximal address. This is Mr. Breeze's registrable offense history. This has been made available to you on the fact sheets and is taken verbatim right off of that. And so I want to get right into the specifics about what happened. In 2012, Mr. Breezee was convicted of criminal sexual conduct in the 3rd degree in Ramsey County for a 2007 offense. In 2007, when this occurred, the victim was an adult female, 19 years of age, and Mr. Breezee at the time was 26 years of age. He did not know this victim, and she did not know him. She was out with a group of her acquaintances, and they had encountered Mr. Breezee and struck up a conversation and brought him along with them to another location. While at that location, as the evening progressed, Mr. Breezee indicated that he could assist in getting or attaining illicit substances. The victim accompanied him to a different location with the idea that they were going to be buying a substance. Once in this isolated location, Mr. Breezee took advantage of that isolation and assaulted the victim. She did not know who he was, nor did her acquaintances. And so it took DNA evidence to ultimately find Mr. Breezee and connect him to this horrific offense. And for this crime, Mr. Breezee was committed to the Commissioner of Corrections for a period of 171 months with a 10-year conditional release period. Now I'm going to pause here for a moment and address another question that will often come up in meetings like this. And that question is Brad, why is it that those who engage in conduct and behavior like this that shocks the conscience, why are they allowed to re-enter society, if only to potentially engage in this behavior once again and hurt someone else? And the answer comes in part in the explanation of our sentencing model. In Minnesota, in the late 70s, we went away from the more familiar method of parole, where an individual would go to prison on their file if they were convicted and serve a portion of that time before becoming eligible to go before a review panel or board. And that panel or board would then determine if they would be allowed parole to serve out the remainder of their time in the community, transitioning back into day-to-day life. Now, what we found from our data and research was that for those individuals that engaged in this type of harm, person harm, rarely, if ever, were granted parole. Now, what you may feel when you hear that statement is, that's just fine. They have earned every single day that the court has been able to give to them. But what we found from our data was that for those individuals that served their full time and did not have the opportunity to transition back into the community, once they were walked to the gate at that expiration date and told, do not come back, it did not impact recidivism or reoffending in a same or similar fashion in any real significant way. And so we knew we had to do better. And what we went to as a state was a model then of determinate sentencing. What determinate sentencing does is it structures their time in the prison system and mandates it by law. No judge, no jury, no law enforcement agency, and no correctional agency can determine when or if a committed individual to prison gets to enter society. They will re-enter society after serving 2/3 of their given sentence by law. And the reason this has shown to work quite effectively is that because there was a transition from the institution where they were engaging in treatment, counseling, therapy, medications, and so on to assist them to enhance those protective factors, and then transition to the watchful, diligent work of law enforcement and corrections to incorporate those skills and tools into their lives while in the community was very successful and has brought recidivism rates down in a very impactful way. And so this is the methodology behind determinate sentencing. And so the way this breaks down is 2/3 of that 171 will be served in an institution. He will get credit for time served for local community time in jails from the date of offense forward. And then when he hits that final 2/3 mark, again, he comes out by law to serve the remaining 2/3. And because of the nature of this crime, the state has enhanced that amount of time for an additional decade. So that additional 10 years gets tacked on to ensure that he has had ample time to work with his agents and law enforcement as he continues that transition back into our communities to implement those skills and mitigate those risk factors. Because we know right now in Minnesota, 90% or more of our incarcerated people will re-enter our communities. And we've found that this method very much works to address those known predictive risk factors in a much more direct way. This is Mr. Breeze's prison chronology as it relates to this offense. If you want to know his full criminal history, like I'd mentioned earlier, it is available to you on the BCA's public criminal history search site. But we're going to stay focused on that registrable offense again, as it is the reason for our notification today. So he entered prison in August of 2012 for that conviction of that CSC 3 from 2007. In February he was assessed by the End of Confinement Review Committee of 2021 and assigned a risk level of 3. And in January of 2022, he was released at that 2/3 mark to intensive supervision, or ISR. And he will be moving from his current community to the Oakdale community on October 23rd, remaining under that intensive supervised release structure. As it sits for Mr. Breeze, his duration of supervision on this file is set to expire in April of 2036. He is required to register, however, for life. He will always have to let law enforcement know where he lives, where he works, what he drives, and so on. But he will complete his duration on correctional supervision in 2036. Now I want to talk about and transition to another component of that broader state risk management system. And as you can see, this actually came online before, it predates the registry. And it is intensive supervised release. And it is a very unique program here in Minnesota. And this program is designed to ensure that on that transition point for those that are designated to be high need and high risk, that they are receiving that direct care and service. So to give you some perspective, a traditional supervision route for an agent supervising registered predatory offenders in the community that have no risk level assigned because they haven't gone to prison is about 50 to 60 individuals. And that is very manageable by one given agent. But for intensive supervised release, this statute sets by law that no one agent will ever supervise more than 15 individuals. And you can just see the laser beam focus that that provides. These agents are able to get to know these individuals on a very, very direct basis and know their risks and their triggers, and they know how they're behaving and conducting themselves in the community so that should they fall into pre-offense patterns, intervention will be sought quickly and will mitigate any potential for future harm. The goal of ISR, obviously, is public safety. And we do that through the work to successfully reintegrate those folks into the community. Because as you saw from Mr. Breeze's information, he will come off supervision at some point. And we want to make sure he's internalized those protective factors so that when he does expire, he goes on to continue and lead a quiet existence. Because him succeeding and being a quiet community member is all of us being safer. The ISR model follows a very rigorous release planning process where they consider what options are available to an individual resident or registrant, I should say, and determine the best among those available options. They are monitored directly and they have daily contacts with their agents. The agents have a pretty robust toolbox of things they can utilize in their efforts to manage and supervise this population, up to and including the GPS monitor and other additional assessment tools or mitigating structures to help to ensure that these folks are making good choices as they integrate into the community. At no time can a ISR-based level 3 engage in activities in the community that are not pre-planned well in advance, at least a week in advance. They can do nothing impulsively. They cannot enter the community without notification to their supervising team. The only time they can break their routine or their schedule is for reporting to the emergency room. And if they tell their agent that they are going to the ER, the agent will go to that ER and confirm their presence there. And so you can just see the diligence and robustness of intensive supervised release. Again, ensuring that successful reentry is achieved. For those level 3 designees on ISR, they are not allowed to phase off of the program unless or until their risk level is reduced. For those of lower levels, they do phase off the program usually within a year. However, that program can be reinstated or restarted at any time if the need arises. And as I mentioned, ISR very much functions like law enforcement. They are always on. And law enforcement has a direct contact number to connect with them in the time or need, if the need arises. And so those daily contacts are made. Agents have frequent face-to-face contacts with the individual, unbeknownst to them, within the community at their scheduled events or outings. And so they know that they may be looked in on at any given time. This is Mr. Breeze's ISR team. They operate in a team so that they can maintain that 24/7 observation. And he is currently assigned to Agent Jeremy Boot, but like I say, the team functions collectively. And so if you have any concerns or questions about conduct that you may see this individual engaging in the community, or just more interest in the program and how it functions, certainly reach out and connect with the supervision team. If you see Mr. Breeze engaging in conduct or behavior that you feel is concerning or seems inappropriate, I want you to reach out and connect with local law enforcement. Local law enforcement is your best and most direct resource. The Oakdale Police Department has been managing and addressing this unique population since it became specified in the 90s, and they are very good at what they do. So if you have concerns, as your awareness has been broadened beyond this individual, of anyone that may be engaging in conduct or behavior that just raises the hair on the back of your neck or makes you concerned for the safety or welfare of yourself or another, I want you calling 911. Because we know, again, as your awareness has been broadened, that it's not just this one individual that we want to think about when it comes to those at risk. If you have just a standard question about how the Oakdale PD operates and manages this unique population, certainly contact their non-emergency number, and they are there and available to assist and address your questions at any time. Additional information and resources that I want to provide to you is you're now trying to take this information, and I always say it's kind of like trying to drink from a fire hose. I'm trying to put as much into as little time as possible. Do know that one of our really best and most robust resources is our own Office of Justice programs here in Minnesota, and in our Department of Corrections, Victim Services, and our restorative justice folks. If you want to get notifications on this or any other registrant who's subject to broad public notification on when and if they change their status, you can sign up for that notification here with our victim services folks. So do feel free to call them or email them if you'd like such notifications. If you have questions about family safety planning and such, they can obviously be a great resource as well. But I want to provide to you your most direct resource as you're contemplating all this information. And because from what we know, with our data and our information, is that someone watching this video will entirely likely have either been directly impacted by this type of harm or have supported somebody who has been impacted. And conversations like this, as much as we try to ensure that we're not stirring up or reharming folks, have a way of creating fear and dis-ease. If you find that you're struggling or you know somebody who has been triggered or is struggling with this information, please do reach out to the Tubman Center. They can assist and support you. If you have questions about the services they provide or want to volunteer for their phone lines and stuff like that, certainly reach out and connect with them. They are a tremendous resource in your community. Here's some additional information on resources. Again, this is the tip of the iceberg. There's so much data and information and knowledge on this group and this topic, and I want to make sure that you know who to reach out to and connect to get good information and data. And again, there are definitely other agencies. This is just a snapshot, but at least to get you started as you're looking to continue to augment that family and community safety plan. And I will leave you with this as I wrap up today. And I appreciate you for sticking with me, as I know this is a lot of difficult information to receive. But if you've taken nothing away from all of what we've talked about, please let it be this: the 3 90s and the 2 Rs. From what we know, from all of our data and research, and we know a lot, is that 90% of those individuals who have been identified through our criminal justice system do not go on to recidivate in a same or similar fashion. 90% of those who engage in this type of harm, sexual harm, are known to the people they hurt. And they use that relationship of trust to get isolated contact with those who they intend to harm. And the last 90 is really the inverse of the first. Again, from all of our data and information, we know right now in Minnesota, if I could take all 18,000 plus of those registered individuals and put them on the moon, I would have impacted sexual harm in our state by no better than 10%. And that is just not enough. It is that broad awareness. Those who have not been identified are the most likely to engage in this type of harm. And so broad awareness is key. And the last is the 2 R's. It can often feel like geographical proximity is predictive of potential risk or harm. But from all of our data, with those who did reoffend or recidivate, we looked at each and every one of those incidences and concluded none of them would have been prevented or avoided with a residency restriction or a geographical proximity prohibition. It really comes down to relationship. Social proximity is so much more telling than any geographical proximity could ever be. Because we know that where a registered individual lays their head at night and goes to sleep is where their risk is at its lowest. Where they're spending their waking hours is where we want our awareness to be at its highest. And we know that they can spend their waking hours anywhere, traveling throughout communities, crossing boundaries and borders all the time. And so that social proximity is so much more valuable as a mitigation strategy. I want to thank you again for your time and thank the Oakdale Police Department for asking and allowing me to come out and speak with you today. As you've been hearing all this information, I want you to reach out with any questions you may have to whatever agency or entity that you feel is most appropriate to address those questions. Like I had mentioned earlier, your local law enforcement is your best and most direct resource, but please do feel free to reach out to any of those providers that I had identified or to me with any questions you may have. Thank you and take care.